and today we're going to be doing a short introduction to Java. So, we're going to be going over what is Java, what do we use Java for, the basics of Java, and a little fun project at the end just to kind of review all the ideas. So, how do computers work? So, just like how humans interact with each other in different languages like English, Spanish, or French, humans communicate with laptops and computers or phones through programming languages. So, there are many programming languages like Python, JavaScript, C, and C Sharp. But today we will be talking about Java. So, Java was developed in the 1990s to fill a gap in the software industry. Basically, what it did is it brought a lot of features that weren't didn't exist in languages before. It was created by James Gosling and Patrick Naughton from Sun Microsystems. It was initially called Oak and it later evolved to become Java. So, before we start, let's talk about some everyday examples of how we use Java in our lives. So, Java is used for many softwares like online shopping, gaming apps, online messaging, and advertising. So, all of these platforms use Java to run their businesses or apps or whatever it may be. So, let's talk quickly about what's good about Java and what's not so great about it. So while Java has a lot of benefits, there's also a lot of newer languages that have improvements. So let's just talk about why we still like it and why we don't. So some of the pros about it is that it's very simple and easy to learn. It's a secure language, which means that just people can hack into it and stuff like that. It's cheap and easy to maintain, and because it's high level program, it's easy to remember syntax. And syntax is basically just the rules associated with the language. So each language has a different set of rules. Like for Python, there's really strict rules about indentation, spacing, and things like that. And Java has other rules about semicolons, which we'll go over later. So now let's talk about some of the cons of Java. So one of the biggest issues is that it's a lot slower compared to other languages. It takes a lot longer to run programs, and especially when it's longer. The other problem is that there's no backup for data, which becomes an issue for companies trying to store information and stuff. It's really easy for information to get lost and it takes up a lot of memory and it's really complex code. Like to perform something very simple, it requires a lot more coding than it would if we were to do it in a different language. So, despite this, we still use Java a lot because it's a great way to start programming. So, let's talk about some of the basics of Java. So, we can practice our Java skills through environments called IDE. So IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, and it's used to test and edit code. So basically, how it works is we would create a program and put it into our IDE and see if it performs the action that we want and it has the results that we want it to. So this is some basic coding examples, which are probably a little bit complicated for beginner programmers, but I think it's a really great way to see what Java can do in a simplistic way. So some of these are if else statements, print statements, and return statements. And finally, there are semicolons. So like I mentioned before, it is semicolons are part of the syntax for Java, And at the end of almost every line, we have to add a semicolon, and it's just one of those rules that like we can't really like do anything about. Um, we also have to use brackets when when we want like blocks of code, and if we're using those, then we don't have to use semicolons. So to kind of reiterate the basic coding and like explain them a little bit more, but hopefully these will make sense in the project that I will show next. So basically, a function is how we do many things in a single program. So each function performs a certain part of the program that we're trying to design, and all the functions like add up to form a larger project. So for example, if we were making a program to store someone's information for a game, we could make a function that would keep their name. We could make another function with their highest score in the game. We could keep another function with like who they're like friends with on the game. So that's just how like just the general structure of programs work. So first, let's start with if-else statements. So how they work is it's like pretty self-explanatory. It does what it sounds like. So if something is true, then it does something. Else, it doesn't do it or does something else. So as you can see, since the if statement is like a block of code, I use the like curly bracket to show that this is a block of code, and it just makes it easier to read code and like understand it. Um, and the second thing is print statements. So how print statements work is when we use the syntax system.out.println something, it will return whatever we put inside the parentheses. So like when we actually run the program, that's what it will show. And the final thing is return statements. So how return statements work is at the end of the function, we can return a value that we want. So like for example, if a function was storing a person's name, but in the function we like somebody else, let's say somebody else had the same name as this person and we want to differentiate it in the function. After we do that, we want to return the newer version of the person's name so that like we don't have two of the same people. So now let's go over the project. So this is like a super simple project which incorporates all of the things that we just talked about. So before I start, I just want to like quickly talk about the variables. So variables are how we store like any information. It's very similar to like how we use it in math if you're familiar with that. So we could like store like 2 for x or 3 for y or like whatever you want basically, and that's just like how we operate most programs. And but the unique thing about Java, which doesn't happen in all languages, is that we also have data types which we have to also include when we first use a variable. So when we're first using that variable, we're telling the computer like, okay, I'm gonna use this variable x and it's going to be an integer, which is a whole number like 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're just letting the computer know that like, okay, we're gonna be using this variable. So now that we know that, let's look into the project. So if you look, there's 2 functions in my code right now. The first one is the main function, and the second one is the new function which I made. So the main function is like automatically comes like initialized when you create a new project in your IDE. And that's where you can like basically test your code and see if it does what you want it to. So the white side of the code is where I write my code, and the black is what the IDE reads when it reads everything and then returns the like value that you want. So in the new function, I created an integer x, which is a variable, and I made x equal to 2. And now we're going to be using the if-else statement that we talked about before. So what this is doing is first is checking if x is equal to 2. And if x is equal to 2, then we're going to make x equal to 3. Else, we're going to make x equal to 1. So in this case, we already, in line number 8, initialized x as 2. So in number 9, it's checking, is x equal to 2? Yes, it is, right? Because 2 is equal to 2, so that's true. So now x is equal to 3. And we're not going to enter into the else condition because if statement is true. So now that we know that's true, we're going to return x. So what that does is we're going to return the new version of x. So we change x from 2 to 3. So now we're returning the new x. And now if we go back to the main function, I create another new variable called a, which is going to be an integer. And I made it equal to new function. So what that does is it's calling the function in main. So it's like telling the computer, the IDE that, okay, I want you to go this function and do this. So it goes to int a equals, and then it's going to go to new function, which is at line 7. It's going to read all of that code, and then it's going to make whatever is returned at the end at line 15 equal to int a. And then in line 4, we're going to do the print statement that we talked about before. So now we're saying print line a. And a is equal to what? It's equal to 3, right? Because at the end of the function new func, we made x equal to 3. So when we do this, as you can see in the right section where with the black part, it says 3. So when we run it, that's what it returns, which is what we want. So hopefully that makes sense. It's I know it's a little bit difficult to understand, but hopefully it kind of incorporates all of the things that you learned in this video. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys learned something. Bye.